Welcome to my budget deck channel where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible. So if this is something you'd be interested in, then why not subscribe? I have had a look at one of my favorite archetypes, and you can already see the Tindangler is back, basically, because this has gotten some, well, indirect support, I want to say, and crawlers have always interested me, although there will be a slight thing that I'm going to be rant about in this video, because I didn't do it in the last video because I kind of forgot that this was a thing, and I only realized it later on in gathering the replays, but I've already had recorded the whole deck profile, so yeah, wasn't in the last one, added it in the description. Now in this one I'm going to be talking about it, and it will be about this trap card. First of all though, the lineup: Krawler Spine, very straightforward, a monster pop, and since you will be able to search the card that flips over your flip monsters, this can be quite nice. And also there's other ways why this card is very strong these days, because you can easily summon it out, and it is probably one of the crawlers that does the most, which a monster pop that sometimes goes off says a lot about how good crawlers are, but it is what it is. One spell trap card pop, because floodgates are still a thing, although they did get hampered on the ban list, but they are still a thing. Runic is still a thing, although they have protection for the field spell usually, but having a card that you can somewhat search and that destroys spell trap cards on the board is never too bad. Krawler Receptor, you can easily set this card and, well, prepare for your next turn with this one, because you play kind of a stally deck anyway, and then if your opponent runs this card over, it's not too bad, because then you can actually search Soma, and Soma is a very key piece to this deck, and it will be getting you into other plays then on the next turn, which is very important. Ranvier used to be like a terrible card, but nowadays it's not too bad because you can summon it out, and if you then go into the Krawler Link monster and then Ranvier sets itself back, then you can technically, the problem is with this one that you have to summon 2 with the Link monster, and then you will possibly not have enough cards in your graveyard that you can actually add to your hand. Sometimes if your opponent messes up the order because they don't know which card is which, then you can actually activate the Ranvier effect, add your Link monster back to your extra deck, and add Soma back to your hand. And if you have other crawlers, like small crawlers in your graveyard, then you can actually add them and Soma back to your hand, so you already have like a full Soma play during the next turn. So this is actually quite a nice thing to do. And up to the next one, which is Dendrite. Didn't play that in the other deck, but in this deck it actually makes sense, because with the Tindangles you actually have cards that you want in your graveyard, so this card's effect actually becomes a lot better. And its attack value is decent with the crawler attack buff sometimes, question mark. It's okay, it's not a terrible card. Up to the next best card in this deck, behind Krawler Soma in my opinion. This one is the good Tindangle. It's a bit less good if you don't play like a purish version of Tindangles, because this card only shines really much if you draw this card in combination with another Tindangle, because then you can actually use the card effect to the fullest. Like this, it's just basically like one more monster on board and a discard, which isn't terrible in this deck, plus it's very easily searchable, so I do like this card. It's just not as strong as if you would play a more pure Tindangle variant, but it is what it is in the end. We have Spirit of the Fallwind, a card that can easily search this and technically the crawlers, but usually you don't want to be doing this. What you mainly want to be searching is the good Tindangle with this one. Also, this one technically, funny enough, with Small World and Mothman can also get you into this one. So if you draw this twice, you normal summon it, it gets negated, and you have Small World in hand, you can still end up getting into this one, but you lose so many resources on the way, because obviously Small World minuses you, and the Tindangle card also kind of minuses you. It does send stuff to the graveyard, but if you don't have another Tindangle in hand, then you will only end up with one more monster on board, and then that's also problematic. But in theory, this is a thing that you can be doing. Spirit of the Fallwind, other than that, doesn't serve much of a purpose, but if you normal summon it, you can then flip it down if you also have Soma in your hand, so it's at least a monster on board where it doesn't really matter if it gets flipped face down, because you don't need it for any other plays at least. We have one Tindangle Angel, the only Tindangle card that doesn't synergize with our Small World Bridge. Bit annoying, but since we only run one out of it, it's not too bad. Usually you want it in the graveyard and revive it, then it can revive some other kind of stuff. A lot of the time Deus X-Krawler if you like, so this is a way to get it back. This card does some stuff, I would say. It's not terrible, but it's also not amazing. In some other flip variants, this card is a lot better, like the Shaddoll variant, for example, because then it actually gets you stuff back that gains you resources. Like this, it can get some crawlers back that will inevitably be in your graveyard, which is quite good because you mill quite a lot of stuff. So it's not terrible, especially in the grind game. You could technically run 2, but I feel like that would be stuffing the deck a tiny bit too much. Now up to one of the most important cards of this deck, sadly, strangely, but there's multiple reasons for why this card is good. First of all, it's an insect monster, so you can actually go into the Krawler link with this card, which is somewhat funny at least. Also, usually don't want to be doing this though, because you want 2 crawlers in the graveyard. So if you already have them in the graveyard, then it's nice. If you don't have them, then it's not really worth it going into it with it, because then it doesn't float, because you don't have 2 crawlers in your graveyard, so it does actually effectively nothing. The fact that it's insect though is very good for the small world bridges, and this time I promise you I'm not going to be messing it up in the video. No corrections needed, I've got it all written down. Let's talk about what this card is a bridge for. It is a bridge from small crawlers into the Soma, because this card is an insect. These cards are insects, and this card is an insect. And other than that, they have no levels in common, and they have no attribute in common, because this is dark and the other ones are earth. Attack stat wise, this one also works out, because there's no attack point 1800 attack point crawler and no 400 defend point crawler, so this card is a bridge for this one. It's a bridge from Tindangles other than Angel, because Angel is level 4, from the other Tindangles into Soma as well, because this card is dark and none of the other levels match up with this one. And for this one, it's an insect, so it also works for this. So it can get you, even if you have multiple of this one, for example, or you'd rather have Soma in a certain situation, then this card can also get you into it with Small World. And not even, let's not stop there, it can get your other Tindangles, well, basically these 3 into this one as well, if you'd rather have this one. The problem is you don't want to banish this, so effectively it only really works if you have Intruder in your hand and you don't want Intruder, then you can do it. That's why I have like multiple Intruders. Technically you can be playing 2 of this. If you want it to be super risky, you can be playing 2 of this and cut 1 Mothman and hope that you don't draw into it, but then it kind of kills the whole small world thing, so I kind of like 2 Mothmans in this regard. And funny enough, like I said, it can get Spirit of the Fallwind into this one as well. Not that you really want to be doing this, but it could do. So this card is a bridge from like both engines to each other, and it does quite a lot of stuff. I kind of mentioned it in my last deck profile as well with the sprite crawlers, but this time I actually decided to include it in here because there's a second reason why this card is somewhat good. Not only for the activated effect, because that can sometimes have a bit of, like, it adds consistency, but also is risky, because if you already have stuff like Soma in your hand and you then want to use it on this card, but then you discard Soma, that's a bit terrible, so not overly good. But what you can be doing is discard it with the good Tindangle and then trigger the effect. Yes, you will give your opponent a tiny bit of a consistency boost as well, which can sometimes be absolutely awful, but this also gives you an opportunity to discard other cards in hand that you possibly bricked on that you can't do anything with, like the World Legacy's Mind Meld or the Tindangle Trap card, for example. So it has multi-purpose and it works really well with your consistency, because sadly, flip decks, especially this one, still relies heavily on you drawing actually into Soma, because Soma is like such a good one card play of, well, for so many different things. So I feel like in total this card kind of does matter, and the fact that this is a dark monster isn't completely useless besides the whole small world package either, because it can actually help you going into Shaddoll Winda, but I'll be talking about this in a second. 1 Dholes, because I tried to cut down on, first of all, the rarity, second of all, on the cards, and this card can actually do stuff when it's in the graveyard. The thing is, it works very well if you discard it with Jhrelth and you have another one in hand, but since we run quite a small Tindangle package, I felt like this effect didn't really come up all that much, and you can still send it to the graveyard by Dendrite as well. It felt like it bricked up my hand quite a few times, but if you want to find some space in the deck for it, if you want to cut like Spirit of the Fallwind, if you want to cut 1 more of the crawlers, then you can fit another one in this. But if this card is in your hand, it does brick you, and since I decided to only run 1 of the traps, because this deck already has so many bricks and the turn 1 plays already aren't as strong as you want them to be, I felt like going with the smallest ratio of the Tindangles as possible, so you can get this whole combo off once, hopefully win the game on it. And other than that, you kind of grind yourself towards this, because like this card gets you like itself most likely into the graveyard and another Tindangle, and if you have one in hand then it's already 3, and then so on and so on and so on. You can easily get stuff to the graveyard because you can recycle this card, you can add stuff to your hand, then discard stuff. There's so much you can actually be doing. It's not too bad. You just won't be getting off the Tindangle combo like instantly turn 1/turn 2. Most of the time you will have to be waiting a tiny bit, but since this deck is very grindy anyway, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. This card good in general because obviously it works with stuff like Soma as well. Sometimes you will have to make sure that you have enough zones on your board, which is funny to say for a flip deck, but yes, sometimes you will run out of zones to summon this, and since this is a mandatory effect, you cannot, like once you summon the first one face down, this will trigger in your graveyard, and then you can't trigger it again this turn, which is a bit annoying. Also can trigger during your opponent's turn if you summon stuff off of your Krawler effects, for example, off of the Krawler Link monster and so on, so you generate some form of resources. Krawler Soma, I don't think I have to tell anyone anymore how good this card is. This card is absolutely amazing. Really love this card for flip decks, insect decks, for lots of different things, and this deck is no exception. You can easily do plays with this one if you just want to be special summoning 2 defense position monsters like Spine and possibly Ranvier, Dendrite, even Axon or Receptor. Works totally fine. If you want to be going into some link place, this is fine because this card has easy access to Shaddoll Construct, because you can summon your flip monsters face up, then you can go into Construct, and with Construct, if you have a Tindangle monster in your hand, you can easily go into Winda, because then you have 1 Shaddoll monster with Construct and 1 Dark monster in hand, so this is like a thing that you can be doing. Technically, you could easily be going into Shekinaga as well, because this card is Earth, and then you still have this one on board, so you could go into this one, but you don't have a Shaddoll card in your hand that you can discard. This is more of a combo for the Shaddoll variant, which I will be doing as well. Don't worry about this. This is going to be one of the next videos. Krawler Shaddoll. We'll go through all the Krawler stuff because Soma is such a nice card and I like Krawlers, so this is what you can expect in the future. But yeah, didn't feel like including Shekinaga because you literally have no discard in this variant. Deus X-Krawler easily summoned off of World Legacy's Meld, which isn't too hard to get into the graveyard these days, and yeah, technically it's also summoned off of the effect of the normal Krawlers if they get destroyed or like leave the field but not be shuffled back in the deck, because we these days can't activate effects of monsters anymore that have been shuffled back into the deck because they're not on board. Like it doesn't work anymore because they're face down or something like this, and there's been a massive rule change which actually was quite a while ago already, but it actually hampers Krawler's ability to do stuff, and that is what I wanted to talk with this card about. I'm not sure if I said it in the last deck profile, but I thought, and it would make sense because I'm pretty sure this is what the card was meant to be doing, if you activate this card and your extra deck monster then gets sent back to your hand, which is the extra deck in this case, this card's effect doesn't trigger anymore. And I'm pretty sure at the start when they came out it did, and I think they changed the rules afterwards. Correct me if I'm wrong, maybe it was always like this and Konami's just like terrible at card design, but I thought I read online somewhere that they actually changed this, not because of Krawlers necessarily, but because of some other kind of thing that they wanted it to be like this, because of the whole maybe face down cards and stuff. You know how it is, Konami and rules, it's very, very complicated from time to time, but that means if you have the Soma combo and you have World Legacy's Meld in your hand, it isn't worth it going into your extra deck monster, because then if you activate it, it's still a monster negate in theory, but it's way better to just leave Soma up then, get Soma back to your hand, have it for the next turn, and actually do it like this and not go into your link boss monster in theory, because the boss monster doesn't trigger off this effect anymore if it is like this. Which is absolutely insane. This is like such an anti-synergy. You basically are forced to do the worst play for the deck to get the better result out of it, which like baffles me completely. I don't know what Konami could do about this. Maybe Krawler was just on the receiving end of something very bad, or they have designed this deck with absolute disregard for how their own rules work. Either one of those two will be the case. I will cut Konami some slack. I think they just messed it up afterwards. If I can believe what I read online. If not, then yeah. No more comments on that one. Let's continue with the card effects. World Legacy Survivor, very good to get into Soma, very good to get Krawlers into the graveyard, very good to get Tindangles into the graveyard. The only annoying thing is if you mill this one before any other Tindangle, because then its effect goes to waste. Kind of sad, but it is what it is. Good for getting Meld into the graveyard, good for getting Delaunay into the graveyard. Very, very strong card, but beware, you can only link someone after you activate this card, so the whole Shaddoll play doesn't work anymore if you then add Soma. Just something to keep in mind because it's easy to forget. Small World, already talked about this, very, very good for searching your best card in your deck or your second best card in the deck, and that is technically what you want to be doing. Since this deck isn't very expensive, I thought 3 of this for a good consistency boost, because if this deck needs one thing, then it is consistency. If you want, you can also play Prosperity. Problem with Prosperity is you technically do have draw effects in the deck. You do have Danger Mothman as a draw effect, which is, I mean, not the best draw effect, but this card would be stuck in your hand then, and you can only normal summon it for Soma if you decide to run like Prosperity as well. It is what it is. Technically, you could be cutting possibly even like 1 Intruder or possibly 1 Mind Meld, although Mind Meld is somewhat important for the whole Deus X-Krawler combo. But yeah, that is, if you want to add even more consistency to the deck, then this would be a card to do. But obviously stuff like Cold Blooded Wave also somewhat important, because if your Soma effect doesn't go through, then you might want to curl up and cry. World Legacy and Shadow, very, very nice card specifically in this deck, specifically because people do not read further than, oh look, it gives attack and it can special summon, and that's probably all it does. And then they will find out the first time they attack into a flip monster, wait a second, we've beat over this, my monster's gone. And then some still don't read the card, and then they realize, wait, this isn't once per turn, oops, once they ran over your second flip monster. And that makes it very, very interesting, because then your opponent has to find a way to deal, especially with your crawlers, because you don't want to destroy them by card effect or something. The only thing they can actually do is bounce them back to the deck, apparently. Now, also, they don't really want to be running them over by battle, because obviously they lose advantage from this one as well. They lose card advantage, and since this is a non-targeting, non-destruction effect, very, very strong against like 99% of all cards, basically. So this card can be absolutely amazing. The only issue with this card right now, well, more issues, it's kind of slow and it doesn't really do anything for your turn all that much, because you don't run that many low level crawlers that you want to special summon, because then you kind of give away what card it is, and yeah, it's not that good in that kind of regard. And also people still run lots of like Galaxy, Cosmic Cyclones and whatnot because of Runic. So if they have a way to deal with the Runic field spell, they will have a way to deal with this field spell quite easily as well. And yeah, if they read it, it usually doesn't end up being all that good. Double Torrential Tribute, because I feel like it's a grindy deck, and sometimes you need this field wipe in this deck. You really need to decimate your opponent's board just for staying in the grind game, because you don't really have that many other disruptions. The problem is you destroy your own stuff as well, but your recursion game isn't too bad usually with stuff like Soma, with stuff like the Tindangle Angel and stuff. It isn't too bad, but sometimes it does cripple you as well as the opponent, so it's a bit annoying. So that's why I decided to run 2. If you do not like the Torrential Tribute and feel like it does too many negative things for you, then I would suggest fill it up with like 2 Lost Winds, because Lost Wind can be recovered if you mill it by a survivor, so that's not bad. Is in general a very good very good card for the grind game, so that's quite helpful as well. Works against lots of extra deck monsters and also reduces attack points, which can be coming in handy. So if you prefer this kind of stuff, then do run Lost Wind, for example. Needle Sealing I would still recommend though, because with the Tindangle combos, with the Soma combo as well, you will be having lots of monsters on board, and they will most likely be face down, and this card only destroys face up monsters, so this card can nuke your opponent's board while actively doing very, very little to your own board state. So I felt like this card, if anything, was really, really important in this one, because you can consistently put like 2 face down monsters each turn on board, and then once your opponent has like 2 monsters, you can just nuke their board, and then they will not always pass turn, but a lot of the time they will. You have to watch out with Sprite though, as soon as they have Carrot, these cards become absolutely useless, sadly. I mean, it still reduces their resources, I guess, but it's not even remotely as good as it could be. One of the Tindangle cards, you can, I don't know, like, it's good, obviously, you want it for the graveyard effect, but if you play multiple of this, then you have the issue, the more you play of this, the little effect it has on like actual gameplay, because like if you have more cards of this in hand, you will break more, and then you actually don't do anything because you can't set this card and actually do stuff. Because I do not run Tindangle Acute Cerberus, because if you run Acute Cerberus, you also have to run Base Gardener, and if you run Base Gardener, then your deck becomes not less consistent, but Base Gardener doesn't do all that much for this deck, and so on and so on. Plus Cerberus is an ultra rare, so I wanted to keep the deck kind of cheap, and you know, you see the issue, so this is why I decided one should be fine, because you have multiple ways of getting it to the graveyard. Discarding it with this one or sending it to the graveyard with the flip effect of this one should be totally fine. We have World Legacy's Mind Meld in here, mainly because you want it in the graveyard and you have lots of discards and lots of ways to mill this one. But the only issue is, compared to the Sprite deck, you don't have that many ways of going into a Link monster but Soma, so it's a bit problematic from time to time. But also, you can just put one Krawler face up on the board and then just have this card ready as well, because it's not, the effect isn't abysmal, it's just not as good, but it's still a monster negate, and you only lose one card on board that isn't a face up card. So that's quite fun, because you can only return one face up monster your opponent controls to the hand. So that is fun if you only have one normal summoned Krawler monster and they don't know about this card, or it's Dendrite and they can't easily beat over it, which is already funny by itself. Then you can get away with it and gain more resources on the way. It's a bit risky sometimes, but it's not as bricky as, for example, this card is. So this has its usages as well. And then you still have the graveyard effect where you can keep going as well. Double pawns, I do feel like this card is mainly searchable, especially with like Lib, but the thing is, I kind of also want to be able to draw into it, and running just one would be a bit bad, because I don't think there's a good way to recycle this one. And since this is a grindy deck, if your opponent gets rid of one, I want to have a second one in my deck that I can get out as well. So 2 is fine. Technically 3 I felt like was a bit much. Sometimes you draw it into 2, and this deck is already inconsistent enough. So I felt like, yeah, the Tindangles don't do stuff during my opponent's turn anyway if I flip them over, and yeah, it is what it is. It's with the Soma combo, it can be very searchable a lot of the time, so it's not too bad just running it at 2. For the extra deck, Winda, because you can easily go into it with the whole Shaddoll construct combo, which is quite nice, and then you can lock your opponent out of certain special summons. It does hinder you from time to time as well, but you can turn it off during your turn, so it's not terrible. Herald of Pure Light can actually technically recycle your Winda as well, so you can redo this, recycle your Krawler monster, because you only run one, because they're quite expensive and they're not as necessary anymore. You can run Quiliak instead of this one as well, because the arrows that point downwards are a bit better for stuff like Mind Meld, obviously, but a lot of the time you will use Mind Meld more with Lib, and then it's not that much of a problem, because most of the other Link monsters point downwards, besides Shaddoll and the Krawler card. So in the end, it is what it is, but yeah, this can help you recycle certain things. And if it recycles extra deck monsters, you don't even have to shuffle one card from your hand into the deck, which is super fun. Cat Shark can help you OTK-ish, like if you use it in combination with Crumble Logos, for example, you have a 4000 attack point monster, which isn't too bad. This turns off certain floodgates or the field spell of Runic, actually, so this can be super fun. This one helps you get over certain monsters and negate effects. Mannequin Cat can actually come in super handy, because I think it's a quick effect if I'm not mistaken, so you can actually do, well, it's not a quick effect, but it reacts to like a thing. I meant to say you can use it during your opponent's turn if they summon something, and you have lots of attributes and whatnots, so it actually does work out quite a lot. We have one Shogi Rook, because this card is level 6 and this card is level 6, so rank 6s work in this deck. Technically you can't be running this one, because you technically have access to 2 level 6 Fiend monsters. Not that you'll ever really have both of them on board, but technically it is very possible actually. Especially because you can summon this one and then normal summon Intruder and then use the Soma effect on another card if you have another card on board. Then you can actually put this up, and this card is one of the better rank 6s in my opinion. That is cheap. Already talked about Construct, already talked about the X-Krawler. This one very strong, good going first, good going second. Can shuffle stuff from your deck back into the extra deck, or into your from your field back into the extra deck, or into your deck if you need to. If you need something like Mothman back in the deck as a small world bridge, then this can technically help as well with the second effect, but mainly you'll be using it to set pawns. Technically you can be setting World Legacy and Shadows as well, but you cannot be activating this because you do not run World Legacy monsters, which you can run the Krawler World Legacy one, but I felt like it didn't really do all that much for me when I actually played the deck. Codebreaker via Swordsman, sometimes it's a good card, linked to with 2300 attack to beat over certain things. This one, Budget Hero, very nice card. Decode Talker, very, very nice budget card. Power Code Talker, sometimes it comes up because you actually have lots of monsters on board, and then doubling the attack of this monster is not too bad actually. So it's quite helpful against beating over high attack point monsters, and Raster Liger, the budget access Code Talker. If you have access Code Talker, obviously run this, but this one isn't too hard to go into in this deck and can actually, in combination with stuff like Decode Talker, go over 4,000 attack points as well and pop some stuff on the field on the way. So very, very nice card as well. Obviously Maxi is a card you might be wanting to run if you have it. Kind of hard cutting certain things for it, but you could be cutting like one pawns, then you could be cutting like the Torrential Tribute, you could be cutting one of this, because it kind of serves as a certain floodgate as well. Your opponent doesn't have to know that you don't run any other hand traps, and that is what Max C can actually do for you. Technically then that would also be searchable with Danger Mothman and Small World, so even running one Max C at the end of the turn, you can search it, so if your opponent might not be doing all that much. It's a bit funny, but it is what it is. And let's go to the rating of this deck. And for the rating, we have power levels to consider. The strength of this deck. How good is this deck compared to other decks, compared to other budget decks? Because this one, the rating scale is just about budget decks. It's about this specific variant, not about any other Krawler Tindangle decks in general. And it is compared to other budget decks, because obviously budget decks are inherently worse than like normal decks. If you like fill it up with like actual good stuff cards, then you will be producing a lot better decks usually. So in comparison to other budget decks, I would give this in terms of power level a very, very, very strong 2 out of 5. It's not amazing because the problem is, first of all, hand traps hamper you completely. The deck is very inconsistent as well, which we will see in the next category as well. And the power level of the board that you put out with this deck usually, even if it's not disrupted, is possibly like maximum like a very, very low 4, like maximum. And compared to other decks that I've done so far, it would really not be fair to give this a 3. It's bordering to a 3. It's not awful anymore because Soma actually does a lot, but that's the only card that has really been added to this one. It can produce some nice stuff with the whole Deus X-Krawler floodgate with Winda, so you have some power plays, but they're not super easy to get into. They're super easy to be disrupted, and they're not 100% consistent either, so it is what it is. It's not like the deck is inherently bad, but for the fact that you have lots of other decks that actually do like disrupt your opponent in a lot of states, this one is a tiny bit worse, but you could as well say it's a 3 if you want to convince yourself a little bit, but I just felt like it was unfair compared to like other decks that I've done so far. In terms of consistency, I would also give this like a very strong 2, but it's not amazing. Like it's really not that crazy. You have bricks in your deck, you have lots of bricks in compared to other decks, and even if you don't have these bricks, you still have hands without the good Tindangle and without Soma that just do not much but set 1 pass or set 2 pass, and that's not really amazing. So consistency wise, you want to be doing the good plays, and the good plays aren't that easy to go into, so a strong 2. When it comes to budget value, actually, I will give this deck a 4, because you don't really need many cards for this one. There's basically nothing you need but the good stuff. You will have Small World, which is an amazing card for budget value in general, because you can search nearly every card, well, every card in the game basically. And for cheap decks, this is a nice thing to boost consistency. With Soma, a card that works in lots of decks, the only ultras that you basically need for this deck is very easily used in so many different variants of so many different decks. You just have to play a few bricks with it, like 2 crawlers usually, but that's usually fine. It's not too bad. Technically you want to be playing 3 in case you draw into one of them, but it is what it is. That's why the budget value of this is quite good, because the other cards, like there's not that many other rarity cards in here. You have 1 Tindangle card that's a super rare, and 1 Krawler extra deck monster that's a super rare. Winda you can use in lots of different decks as well, so you can use Lip in a lot of decks as well, and Lip kind of goes with the whole Soma package anyway in a lot of times. So budget value of this card, very, very strong, because you don't have to pay much for this deck, and also the cards that you do have to pay for actually are very, very, very good in a lot of other decks, most of them. So at least a 4 or 5, very, very nice. In terms of overall rating, I would say you can play this deck if you already have Soma and Small World anyway. There's no harm in crafting some of the other cards you need for this. If you just want to have some fun flip deck that you can sometimes play on the side, then the deck does what it does. It's not amazing, but it's also not even remotely as awful as it was when these decks first came out. So I would say I would recommend it, but only if you're into fun decks, not if you're into like the most competitive setup. Although flip deck wise, this and Penguins is probably where it's at right now. And on to the replays. This one is actually a very rare replay of this deck going second, mainly because the opponent doesn't do overly much going first. So we will see that in a second. They are not putting up a crazy board, they're setting one card, which, you know, it happens sometimes, but we are no consistency monsters either. So what we will be doing is, obviously, we use our good Tindangle. We can do a whole lot of stuff now. We can technically discard stuff like Angel, and then send another Tindangle to our graveyard, and then technically do this, but the only problem is we already drew our Dholes, so with this it wouldn't work. Technically we can discard Dholes and then summon one card from the graveyard, which would be Intruder, which then, yes, we have two monsters on board. It's also not terrible. What we can also do is send Meld to the graveyard, so we have it on a later stage. We can send Mothman to the graveyard to hopefully draw into another good card that we then can normal summon Angel, for example. If we draw into Soma, flip Angel back face down, and then go into the Soma plays, and then we already have Meld possibly in the graveyard as well with the discard of Mothman. So these are all valuable options. I decided to go for the Mothman option, send Intruder to the graveyard because that's basically the only card left in the deck at that point. We will be using Mothman's effect to draw into a card. I decided to discard Dholes then because I saw what I drew at this point, and then at least with Dholes in the graveyard I can special summon Intruder, so I do have 3 face down monsters on board, which isn't terrible, especially considering we have Needle Sealing. I could have gone for the whole Meld thing, but since I do not really have a link play this turn, it didn't matter at all. And yes, like this, I technically could be normal summoning Krawler and then set Meld, and then I have like a monster negate as well, which I don't think I went for. They are playing a Legendary Ocean, so like water control probably. So we end up with this one, and I decided to not go for the Krawler play and just set Angel, because Angel then can summon stuff back, especially the Dholes technically, or one of the other two if the other two get destroyed first. I could have done the whole Krawler thing, but I feel like it's still a bit televised if you don't set the Krawler. The only thing they can think of is, oh, the person misclicked, but I don't think that's too good. I set the World Legacy Meld anyway because it's a good distraction for back row removal. You want this in the graveyard most of the time anyway, and like this, the opponent has a 50-50 chance of hitting the wrong card, which is always important as well. This is already shaping up to be somewhat of a grind game. Once you find out that your opponent also plays a control deck, then yeah, it is what it is. They draw into 2 new cards, so they will be able to do stuff. There we go, there's another Legendary Ocean, there is the Jellyfish, and from now on they actually decide to attack into my flip monsters. I'm not sure what is the right play of these kind of things, because technically they can negate the effect if they want to, but I don't think they would want to at this kind of stage. Thing is, would you just wait and let the flip player flip them during their own turn, or do you run into it? But technically I should have known that this one is Intruder and this one is 0 defense, so I don't know why they went for this one, the one that they didn't know what it was. Who knows, but it is what it is in the end. I will be activating the Angel effect. They're not doing anything about that. Maybe because it's in the damage step and they actually can't negate it then. I'm not sure how that whole interaction works then with the flip monsters. But yeah, they decided to not to, or they couldn't, and we've got Dholes, so we can actually send stuff like Meld to the graveyard or the Tindangle set up, and then we will have the whole Tindangle set up in the graveyard as well, so this isn't too bad. I assume these are some kind of floodgates, because water decks do play protection and floodgates. Sadly, we draw actually into the Tindangle trap now, so not that much to do. This was the card they set first turn, so this could have screwed us up potentially, so it's not a terrible first turn by just setting this one. It just didn't come up because we summoned face down. We have to somewhat deal with this because we do run lots of the same type, which we can see here, so we couldn't flip them up actually, because we already control one of the same type, the Fiend. So I'm setting a card that's not a Fiend, so I could technically use this the next turn, setting this one as well in case they blow out our boards. Technically you can keep this in hand and hope you get another discard either, but technically also the Krawler Axon can pop it on board later on, so it's a very hard decision. Let's maybe hope they go for like some kind of field wipe, and they actually drew Harpy's Feather Duster, which is nice. I'm deciding to try and blow up the board because technically I can, because they can't negate trap cards, but they have Solemn Judgment for it, which makes sense because they do not want to lose this card's value on board, but obviously also get them more into kill range with this one, so it's not a bad trade-off for me. Get 2 cards into the graveyard that I actually don't want on my board in the first place, so I'm somewhat set for the next turns. The only problem is there can be only one is still a thing. They go into Pancratops and then attack over my, well, for some reason they do not attack over my stuff, they just blow it up. don't know why. They thought maybe they don't want to give myself the flip effects, which is fine. Now I can't actually use the effect. This is a fun interaction that I wanted to show off as well. Because if there can be only one, the flip effect somehow doesn't activate, which is a bit strange, because I thought the effect still would activate, but since it's not on board then anymore because it gets sent to the graveyard first, then you can't activate the flip effect. And I still have like at least another one of these in deck. Like even if whatever list you're playing, you would still be having one in deck at this point, because I play more than one of the good Tindangle anyway, so it's not that I ran out of cards. And yeah, this is a fun interaction that I wanted to showcase. Keep that one in mind. So this is how this one works. We draw a masterful card, we draw into Soma, which we can actually summon, and by flipping this face down, we can actually, which is quite helpful for us, we could actually have been doing the whole flip duels and send stuff to the graveyard and so on and so on and so on. They did negate this one, which was an oversight on their part, because technically, in my opinion, you should have waited, because I can still normal summon this card, something they didn't think about. But even then, I could have ran over this one and still activated the effects afterwards. I would have just had to sacrifice my battle phase. Although I actually, now I can't run over it, so that's a bit of this. But I could have before, because they would have not gotten this attack boost. We now go into one of our link plays. We go into Lip, because we do have a card in the graveyard now that we can actually search stuff, and what we will be searching is quite obvious. We will be searching legacy pawns. We then have the effect of Dholes, sending another Mind Meld to the graveyard, because why not? Then we link this off, because obviously if we want to get rid of there can be only one, because that can hamper our plays by quite a bit. It's not terrible to link off here, and then send one stuff back to the deck. We go into this one instead of the Decode Talker. There's a reason for this, mainly because I think I couldn't go into Decode Talker because of the type it was, because Decode Talker is Cybers and Lip is Cyber, so I couldn't actually go into Decode Talker, so I had to lose out on some value here. But also this card is good enough to beat over Electric Jellyfish, so this is a thing that also does matter. Shuffle the Floodgate back, we attack, and find out they have Seal Stealth attack. Very, very annoying, because it does, well, do some stuff, but what they do not know is, well, they didn't consider, we also have some stuff that we can still use in our graveyard. And now we have the massive setup with Deus X-Krawler, which is somewhat helpful, because this card but doesn't do what Skill Drain, for example, does, because this one does only negate the activation, but then they can't negate our stuff anymore, but they still could go into Kairoshin and make us send stuff to the graveyard, because that isn't an activated effect. So this is a lingering effect, and this doesn't stop this one, so it is what it is. Like, it only goes against activated effects on your opponent's field, which is a bit annoying from time to time, but yeah, that's what it is. And we also get Intruder back, because Intruder special summons itself when we have other stuff. And now we can actually go into Soma, because Soma doesn't need to be just special summon, we can normal summon it and then set some more cards. We have Axon, so we can possibly get rid of some spell traps. The problem with this one is, as long as you can banish one of the water monsters, they can just make their spell trap not be able to be destroyed, so you have to really play around this. But we also have a very flooded board. Even if they clear our board, we still have Delaunay in the graveyard, so we can still keep on gaining resources, and they are quite low on life points, so they might not be able to continue doing this kind of grind game for the rest of eternity, and then they do surrender afterwards. So this is what the deck can do in a grind game. It looks quite fun. It's not terrible either. On to the next replay though, and on to the second replay, which is now a go first replay. I'll say this now from the start, this replay won't be the most competitive, because I'm pretty sure my opponent could have played a lot of scenarios a lot better if they knew what my cards did. And that's where this deck also shines in a lot of the times, because nobody wants to read these card texts of these cards, and nobody really knows what this deck does either. So that is where this can come in very handy. We have a pretty good hand. We have Needle Sealing, so we can stop some plays in theory. We have Soma, which is quite nice. We have World Legacy and Shadow, which doesn't do much right now, but during our opponent's turn, they at least have to deal with it somehow, because otherwise they'll lose out on like 2 or 3 monsters in the end if they just go to battle phase. So this one actually does a lot, and we have a way of getting Delaunay into the graveyard actually, so this isn't terrible either. We will be doing exactly that as well, because what else would we be doing? We will be sending this to the graveyard, be summoning send Intruder, be summoning this one, and now this is a nice interaction with this specific deck as well, Since you have this card, you actually have tribute fodder to just normal summon Soma as well, so it's not terrible if you have this. You have this in graveyard then, and we can get Intruder back, so it's not absolutely terrible to do this either. We use Soma's effect, we actually summon one in defense position and one face up. Now we use Intruder's effect, so we actually have more monsters on board, and now is one of these rare scenarios where it's actually worth going into the Link Krawler monster, because this one, although it's not getting you any disruptions back, but it floats, and it floats pretty well unless it is bounced back to the hand, which is obviously something that can be happening from time to time. But now we have these two in graveyard, and we could summon them back with Krawler Synapses. Obviously, if they then destroy this one first, this one can't do anything. This one can't actually add anything back to your hand. It is what it is. Well, technically up to, so technically you can actually use Soma, get Soma back if they run this over first, or just get into the Link monster back from your graveyard if it's in the graveyard. If it's not banished, then this is an option, but it doesn't really do crazy amount as you could be. Obviously, you want to get the best resources out of this one possible. Now we activate our last two cards, the field spell, and set our trap card, and we are ready for the next turn. Let's see what they are playing. They will be activating, for some reason they play Dark World Dealings. Don't really make sense if you see what their deck is, but we will not be talking about this. They discard one Hero Kit, which is interesting. Hero Kit sounds, you know, you see what I mean with not quite competitive, but I will get a bit more competitive at least. I decided not to activate the Mothman effect because I did not want them to actually draw into even better cards than they possibly have right now. So yeah, that is why I didn't want to go Mothman, because Mothman would just drawn me into a card that I then possibly would have had to discard as well. Or not possibly, I would have had to, but that possibly might have been bad. Now they go into the Nimble Engine, which is quite fun. Didn't think this was going to be Sprite in the end after seeing the first two cards, but it is. And Hero Kit, if you think about it, makes somewhat sense as a budget option, because this card, if you have 3 in deck and you summon it out with Gigantic Sprite, you can summon 2 more out, and then you actually gain, you plus quite a lot off of this. Not sure if these pluses necessarily achieve all that much, but you have bodies on board, and bodies on board are never too bad, so this is some interesting tick card for sprites as well. Sprite blue searches this, and we already ran into a bit of an issue. We technically could have blown up the field with Needle Sealing once they did 2 Nimble Beavers, in case they didn't have any other way like Sprite Starter or something in hand. Then they would have possibly ended their plays here, but we also would have lost our X-Krawler, and I did not want to risk that. Most Sprite decks only play 1 carrot, so I thought it's gonna be fine. I could still nuke the board if they Sprite Starter, then they can't negate it. Sadly, that didn't happen, and they just had the carrot in hand, so we are a bit screwed with the Needle Sealing, but we can still use it to at least decimate their resources a tiny bit. They go for Gamma Burst here because they think they can actually run us over. Massive misjudgment on their part. You will see in a second why that is the case. Now they go into Gigantic Sprite then activates, Gigantic Sprite does stuff, but before they wanted to do this, they wanted to actually clear their board, because they probably want to go into stuff like Hero Kit, so they needed more zones to actually utilize the whole thing. But the thing is, now they have Sprite Elf and Gigantic Sprite. I thought, why not flip Needle Sealing? So they have to tribute at least one of the two to negate this effect. Obviously, they can then tribute Elf, and with Elf, if they have a second one, that is, they can go into it again, use the effect. So there's that, but I felt like this was still the best point to do this, where they would still have to sacrifice some plays at least. They do negate it, they do tribute Elf, because that's the thing that makes the most sense, not Gigantic Sprite. Now they will activate Gigantic Sprite, get the Hero Kits out, spoiler, because they still have 2 left in deck, so they actually can just go back into Elf, but technically we wasted their Gigantic Sprite activation with this one, so it did achieve something. Now they're getting a card back, getting the Sprite card back, although they have already used this effect, so it's not too bad. They also searched red, so they have a monster negate. Now they get actually rid of their spell trap negate, which, I mean, they have used it this turn, so it makes sense. Other than that, they could have just used the Hero Kits and stuff for this one. Anyway, they summon one of our monsters back to get one of their monsters back, which for some reason makes sense for them to hit the Hero Kit. I don't know. It's a thing, can help, can do stuff. They can go into the Soul Sweeper. They use the Soul Sweeper for some reason to get rid of this one. I mean, if they get rid of this one, then the effect should be triggering, so this wouldn't be that great. Although, I think, technically, if they would have read my stuff, this would have been a massive play. If now they got my monster on board, And then they got rid of my Link monster, because the Link monster has to target 2 Krawler monsters, different names in the graveyard, and special summon them. Now I don't have to link 2 Krawler monsters with different names in my graveyard, so they actually could have gotten rid of my Link monster here with the effect of this card, and it wouldn't have been too bad. But for some reason they either don't see this, which I mean obviously they don't, or they didn't even think of that. For some reason they failed of getting rid of the 0 defense point monster that knew this is what I meant. It's not the most competitive replay, but I still would have had plays if they didn't go for this, because the field spell still exists. They think, oh yeah, look, I can go Gamma Burst, but one massive misjudgment. All level 2 rank or link 2 monsters currently on the field gain 1000 attack and defense until the end of this turn. Guess what's still on my board? Ha ha ha. A bit annoying, but yeah. Technically, they could have cleared it up here, but I think they wouldn't have been able to finish me, even though if they got rid of this card instead of this, because then this card still clears some of their board. I still had some bodies on board, like this and another 2, and they would have lost quite a lot with this as well. So in the end, it wouldn't have made a massive difference in terms of what the end board would be looking like, but they would have been able to do some more damage to me, but it wouldn't have been enough to finish the game in the first place. So technically, they should have probably just searched Smashers anyway. But like this, they cannot even clear this card, so they will now find out what my field spell actually does, which is this one, and now they will be linking off into IP Masquerena to do some stuff during my turn, and the attack will go back to normal. We'll be drawn into Small World, which does absolutely nothing for us right now because we don't have another card in hand. We attempt to pop and trigger the IP Masquerena to see what they'll be going into. Technically, that's their way of getting rid of this one as well, if they have both the Goddess, but even then, I'm pretty sure the effect of World Legacy and Shadows would be getting rid of it if I then ran my Krawler Spine into it. Not 100% sure if that's the case. Not both the Goddess, you know, the Goddess of the Underworld is the one, the Link 5. I'm not sure if I would have been able to get rid of this, but I think I would have been able to, because is it unaffected by card effects that don't target? That might be actually the case. I'm not sure if it says can't be destroyed or if it's unaffected right now. But yeah, that would have possibly been nice. They think a good effect is Griffin, which technically really is, if they actually read my field spell, because now Griffin means absolutely nothing to me. There we go, Griffin to the graveyard, and we still have the Krawler, and the Krawler is live again. We'll also be getting our Intruder back, fun fact. So we have another flip monster that they have to be dealing with in the battle phase. They actually Raigeki here now, no idea. I mean, it does clear the Intruder technically, but it also triggers the effect of my Link monster, and the Link monster can get back to Krawlers, which is also fine. And also they would have to then run them over, which will also be causing issues, or if they get rid of them by card effect, well, if they're face down it doesn't do anything. But I don't think they have another Raigeki in hand. They have the Swab Frog, and at this point they just concede, because they don't want to be dealing with this, because they realized, damn it, I still have to run them over by battle somehow because I can't get rid of all of them, or they just didn't want to get into this whole grind game. But we reduced the resources while keeping up our resources to a very nice level. We still have the Delaunay in the graveyard, which would nearly been live if this card's effect triggers. Then we still have enough. So next turn we could have been doing this somewhat, and yeah, from that point onwards, Spine would have been popping stuff, Ranvier would have been able to add Soma back to the hand, and so on and so on and so on. Whatever they add back, then I could also use Small World with whatever I drew next turn. There would have been still some plays, and this is what showcases what our deck can do the best. It does stuff in the grind game. It does stuff that the opponent has to be dealing with, and they might not know how to best deal with it in the first place. Obviously, you could have done it a bit better than this one, but you know what I mean. Like, it wasn't too bad for the fact that we're playing against some Sprite variant in the end, because Sprite is a bit power level wise a bit ahead of this deck in the first place. Hope you enjoyed the replays. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, but most importantly, I hope you have a nice day.